Hello, my name is Cara Putnam, and I am a lecturer and the School of Management Honors Director at Krannert. And today I'm with you to talk about how ethics can relate to your Project X internship and the different recommendations that you're going to make to student life about what Purdue should look like in the fall as students come back for a residential experience. So ethics is just one piece of the overall project that you should be considering as you work on these projects. Ethics in and of itself is a branch of philosophy, and I know many of you may not have had a class specifically related to ethics. However, it does overlay all decisions, whether or not you're intentionally thinking about it or it's just something that's operating in the background. With business ethics, what we're trying to do is really balance the goals of the organization, the business, with those of individuals and society as a whole. So what that will look like for you is you're working on Project X, is that the goal of Purdue University and of student life is to bring college students back to campus for a residential experience. However, we have the individuals like students themselves, faculty, staff, the larger community around Purdue, and society. And we also have the construct of COVID-19. And so you can't just go with, well, it has to look like it always has looked like, and instead consider what should it look like in today's world and how do we consider all the different needs and individuals who can be impacted by this. So the key to making good decisions is not just relying on our emotions, but instead developing a systematic approach. And that's really what my goal is with this presentation, is to give you just some structure and some tools to think about what the ethical implications of your recommendations are. So one of the things that I think is helpful to keep in mind is that it's really a matter of perspective. And in a minute, I'm going to walk you through four big buckets of how people approach ethics. And in a sense, it would be like looking at this Escher drawing. And if you just shifted the perspective, then how you see this intricate drawing of wood and brick supports is going to look different from every angle and every perspective. And so I really like Escher's drawings because they force me to kind of stretch my imagination and the way that I view these different situations. And so if you haven't ever explored his art, I would really encourage you to because it really can help you get outside your box and outside of your unique way of looking at situations. So here's an example. The pickup is off the road. It's obviously outside the guardrails, but it doesn't look like it's too dramatic of a situation. The driver's going to need help to get back onto the road, but it doesn't look like his vehicle is too damaged. And he probably was able to walk away without too many injuries. So it looks dramatic, but not terrifying until you back up and you see the larger picture. And then you recognize just how close the driver was to going over the cliff and possibly ending his life, which would make it a really terrible day. And that's really what I'm trying to do, is to give you kind of some frameworks and some help to broaden your perspective. Because as we work on different projects, it's very easy to get locked into one way of doing it and one perspective. And so if you can kind of zoom back and look at all the different stakeholders and consider how the solutions you're going to be presenting might affect all of them, it's going to help you to have a much more robust presentation and, frankly, a more robust project. So the four buckets that I mentioned a minute ago are what we're in Krannert calling the core. And it's four different categories of ethics. Now, if you've studied ethics at all, you're going to go, this is way too simplistic, Professor Putman. And I would agree. However, it covers the main areas of how individuals operate. So it's character, obligation, results, and equity. Let's dig deeper. Character has its roots in virtue theory, which has its roots in Aristotle. So the focus of Aristotle was really on who you are, your character at your core. And if you operate out of a character or virtue perspective, You're much more concerned with how your actions speak about who you are than the actual actions themselves. When you look to others, that then means that you're examining people's character rather than how they're acting. Their actions absolutely matter, but more fundamentally, you're concerned with what's motivating those actions. So compliance with the rules is not enough alone to be ethical. Obligation comes from deontology, which is just a big fancy word. What it really means is that the world would be better if everyone acts according to this particular principle. So, for example, with COVID-19, it might be that in your mind, from the research you've done related to COVID, that you think everybody should wear a mask all the time. So the world would be better, it would be safer if everyone acted according to that principle. Therefore, I have a duty to act in that way and to wear my mask all the time. And persons must be treated as an end in themselves, not as a means to an end. And so that's an important distinction. People aren't to be used to get to an end. They're supposed to be looked at as the actual focus themselves. Then there's results, which you might know by utilitarianism. So this has its roots really with Bentham, and it's that we want to focus on what's going to be the right action for the most good. It's going to bring the greatest good to the greatest number of people. It might mean that some individuals aren't going to get everything they want, that there's going to be some harm to a few, but the end result should be the greatest good for the greatest number of people. So we're focused on the consequences. What is the result or the end product of these series of actions that we're asking people to take? And then there's equity, which is postmodern. And so it's much more situational. It's much more focused on what's going to give everybody a seat at the table, what's going to allow everybody to have their voice heard, what's going to help us in this particular situation. So it could also be situational ethics, moral relativism. We're going to look at the specific situations, the specific people involved, and then we're going to decide what is the best solution for all of those individuals. So you can ask yourself several questions as you're moving towards proposed solutions. Who's going to be affected by my decision? Who are the people, the individuals that are going to be impacted? What's going to be that impact on those affected individuals? What ethical perspective of the core is reflected by your decision? And can you justify or can you explain your decision on ethical grounds? One way to think of this that I think might be helpful is what we call the front of the newspaper test. If this action was on the front page of the Wall Street Journal or the Washington Post or the New York Times, would I be able to hold my head up high and say, yeah, I did the best I could based on the restrictions and the unknowns related, in your case, to COVID-19, we came up with the best, most equitable, or the most balanced decision or recommendation that we could. Another way I like to phrase this is the grandma test. If I was talking to my grandma about what I'm working on, and I hope to see her in a couple of weeks, she's 94 and she's amazing, and she's like, "Hey, how are things going?" Would I be able to say, you know what, we've got some tough decisions to make, but man, I think we're doing the absolute best we can based on the information we have and the people that are going to be impacted. So you have to have the will to also do what's right. Um, just having a rational approach isn't going to be enough. So Alexander Solzhenitsyn was a Russian who was thrown into the gulags back in the height of communism, and so has had a lot of moral authority to speak on these types of issues. So the actual framework I want to give you that I think will give you in some ways, the most helpful step-by-step kind of process, because many of you are in Krannert, although not all of you are. And so it helps to kind of have a checkbox of do this, then think about this, then consider these implications. So stakeholder analysis is one tool. The front of the newspaper test is another. There's the Blanchard-Peel 3-step question analysis. Laura Nash has a model. So there's lots of different approaches you can use, but rather than bog you down with all of those, I thought I'd give you this one that I think is fairly comprehensive. And if you seriously consider the 6 questions, I think it will help you as a group to reach a good outcome. So what are those 6 questions? Great. Here you go. So first is to define the problem from the decision maker's point of view. So with Project X, that decision maker is the vice provost for student life, I believe, in most of your situations. So define the problem from her perspective, or the perspective of residential life, or the dorms, or if you're working on an aspect related to how clubs are going to operate. So think about the particular decision maker that you're presenting your proposal to. What is the problem from their perspective? Then stop and identify the stakeholders. So I would rephrase the second question just a little bit to say, who are all the different people who are going to be impacted by your proposal? So for example, with Project X, you're going to have students, faculty, staff. You might have different categories of students, faculty, and staff. There are those who maybe are fundamentally healthy versus those who have an underlying health condition. With COVID, another aspect may be age. So it seems to be that some people who are in certain age brackets are more vulnerable than others. So you might need to consider those type of aspects as well. So don't lock in on big categories. I would really encourage you to, whiteboard out or however you're interacting as a team, just really start throwing out, here are all the different groups that could be impacted or affected by our recommendations. Then define the challenge from those different points of view. So I, as a faculty member, am not overly concerned about coming back to campus and face-to-face instruction. I frankly can't wait to have y'all in my classroom again and get to interact with you on a personal basis. However, I know that there are going to have to be some changes to how I teach because of the realities of COVID. So just think about faculty like me, faculty who are in a higher risk category, and then define the issue from all those different perspectives. And again, I would encourage you, whether you're doing Google Docs or Microsoft Teams or however you're operating as a group, capture those different elements. Then come up with some ideas. And would you be willing to tell your family, your supervisor, your board of directors, your grandma about your planned proposal? So those are the people who are very close to you: colleagues, coworkers, fellow students, other individuals. Bounce it off of how would you feel about presenting them with your proposal. Then think of a broader audience, the exponent, the media at large, the community of Lafayette and West Lafayette. How would it feel to have to describe and validate your proposal in front of a broader audience? Another way to think of this is a lot of CEOs and presidents of companies keep finding themselves called in front of a congressional panel to justify their different actions. So what would that be like? Would you be able to validate that and explain why your proposal is the best? And then reach a decision after you've considered the stakeholders, the facts, all the different alternatives you can come up with. Make a decision. And then the one thing I would add to this is after the fact, and you may not have an opportunity to do that with these Project X internships, but what Laura Nash would add to this model is then evaluate in 6 months, in a year, and try to determine what can we learn from it. Did the action we took have the results we thought it would? Or do we need to tweak our process? Was there something we didn't consider that we should have? So I hope this is helpful in giving you a framework. On the first slide, you have my email address, and I'll just add it here as well. It's just C Putman. There we go, at purdue.edu. And if you have questions or you want me to weigh in on some proposal that y'all are working on, please feel free to reach out and email me at cputman@purdue.edu. In the first 2 weeks of July, I will kind of block out some what I would call office hours to do virtual appointments with different teams from Project X. So if that would be helpful to you, please do not hesitate to reach out, and I will make time to be a resource for you. Congratulations. Good luck and best wishes as you work on these proposals.